Onions, Chapter 4, The Waterfall. It was Saturday morning, another cool and cloudless beginning in the desert. The little waterfall was bouncing joyfully into the small, shallow pool in Sandra Fuller's side yard, creating tiny eddies and swirls and a few ripples. The box of Mr. Bubble sat at a jaunty angle near the pool. Mr. Bubble, a bubble with a happy face, was pictured sitting in his bathtub at home, surrounded by overflowing bubbles. If you look closely, you could see he had little bubble arms and little bubble fingers. Inside Sandra's bungalow, the hands on the grandfather clock in the kitchen read precisely 7:59. There was a moment of silence, ripe with anticipation. Suddenly, Sandra entered the kitchen briskly, dressed in a bathrobe with a towel over her shoulders. She breezed through the kitchen door leading to the side yard, followed by a jubilant Bosco and a more restrained Roscoe. The screen door slammed shut. In a few beats, the hand flipped over to 8, and the old grandfather clock began tolling. It was a little after 8 a.m. C.W. was zipping down old Highway 58 on a skateboard, a quarter of a mile from the Fuller residence, with a copy of a Black Cat comic stuck in his back pocket. He was dodging the grass-strewn cracks as best he could, heading toward Sandra's bungalow on the outskirts of town, grateful he'd found a way to earn some cash. He could see mountains in the distance to his left, and nearer, a gently sloping range of hills. Open grassland in the valley to his right stretched for miles, ending in a blue haze where another set of mountains could be seen. Except for a dove's plaintive call, all that could be heard was C.W.'s skateboard scraping across concrete, along with an occasional speeding car on Highway 60, 100 yards away. C.W. had read his newly acquired comic books well into the night, saving the best for last. Felicia Hardy's exploits were always exciting. Her relationship with Spider-Man fascinated him, probably because he identified with the guy in the spider suit who swung through the city on cobweb strings and chased down the bad guys. The only way C.W. could read unnoticed by Mrs. Williams or the two boys in the bedroom with him was to wait until the boys were asleep, then carefully slip the comics out from under the mattress. C.W. always carried a small flashlight. He'd headed for the corner, placed his back to the sleeping kids, and made sure there was no spillage of light into the room. Mrs. Williams had promised to wake him up at 7, so he'd be sure to arrive at Mrs. Fuller's on time. Having the next few hours to himself had been a real pleasure. Reading comics was a great way to escape the misery of his life. When he read, he was lost in another world, a simple world of good guys and bad guys where justice usually triumphed. C.W. had flicked the flashlight on and opened the first page of The Trial of Galatas. But his greatest pleasure would be when he got to the final comic book, The Black Cat. C.W. glanced ahead. A massive array of brightly colored bubbles was rising to the heavens, dancing provocatively into the sky above Mrs. Fuller's bungalow. The distant sounds of a trumpet pierced the crisp desert air. He coasted momentarily, listening to the instrument and staring at the bubbles, puzzled by their coincidence, then continued moving down the deserted road. As the young worker for hire reached his destination and glided down the hard dirt path that led to Mrs. Fuller's bungalow, the first thing that struck him was the waterfall. Water cascaded down the small hill near the bungalow through an outcropping where two rocks converged. Its source was a natural spring several miles up in the hills behind the bungalow that formed a natural creek. As it gently dropped to sea level, the creek had split off in small rivulets, one of them ending in Mrs. Fuller's yard. The builders of the home had laid small rocks around the area, forming the water into a small pool. After dropping the 10 feet into the pool, the water ran off through a rocky path and disappeared, probably into an underground river. It was an unusual phenomenon, and C.W. was quite impressed by the natural beauty the waterfall presented. Sandra told him later that even in dry weather, the little creek continued to provide a source of water for the waterfall. As C.W. approached the bungalow, he noticed the old hotshot, the one that had slammed into him on his skateboard, parked in the dirt driveway near the garage. He walked over and checked it out, trying to see if he could locate a dent where it had struck him. There was no mark. C.W. shrugged and glanced into the garage. It was empty, except for a bicycle leaning against the wall. The sound of the trumpet had become too loud to ignore. C.W. headed for its source, which led him around to the kitchen, close to the pool. He peeked through the screen door. Sandra Fuller was standing on her head in the corner, playing the trumpet. Her rapt audience was a large Labrador and a yellow streaked cat lying nearby on the linoleum. Both were staring at the inverted body in the corner. As C.W. watched in fascination, Sandra hit the last note and held it forever, causing the dog to break into a series of loud howls. Say it twice. Loud howls. Loud howls. C.W. knocked on the screen. A major mistake. The dog yelped, then bounded over to the door. He jumped against it, knocking it open and sending C.W. to the ground, where he lay spread-eagled. Bosco was on him instantly, licking his face, whining and scratching and scattering slobber everywhere. Help! Help! C.W. yelled. Get him off me! Sandra appeared at the screen door, holding her trumpet. Bosco! Bosco, knock it off! She shouted. The dog stuck its tail between its legs and headed back to its mistress. Come in, Charles. Don't mind Bosco. He gets a little carried away when I have guests. C.W. sat up. Bosco immediately turned back, bounced over to him, and began licking his face again. C.W. started to laugh. Hey, boy, you're a friendly guy, aren't you? Boy. He ruffled Bosco's neck, which sent the ecstatic animal into greater paroxysms of joy. Sandra shook her head and headed back to the screen door. The kitchen was bright and cheerful due to an overhead skylight. The rays of the morning sun streamed down on a big round oak table littered with books and foreign language tapes. The books ranged from classics like Moby Dick and War and Peace to self-help books on gardening, flower beds, baking, smoking meat, learning foreign languages, and the construction of ultralight airplanes. The table and chairs were handmade, but formed with an old-world elegance. The 4 chairs seated around the table were stunning in their beauty. Great craftsmanship had gone into their construction. Gothic in nature, they had pointed arches, intricate carvings, and other design elements derived from 18th century architecture. If you didn't look too closely, you could mistake them for Chippendale, and they were extremely heavy. The white linoleum floor was immaculate. The walls were also painted white with a series of photos covering one wall. Other walls had paintings of circus performers in tights, clowns, elephants, and circus horses. On the wall across from the photos was a stained glass image of a Gothic church, and beside the image was a stunning display of 3 objects. An antique Limoges hand-painted roses charger plate with 2 yellow Minton oyster plates on each side. A gentle blue spotlight highlighted the display from above. The porcelain charger and plates had been given to Sandra by a wealthy Italian count who'd fallen in love with a young woman's circus performance. The lofty grandfather clock stood next to the screen door leading to the side yard and the waterfall. You read a lot? C.W. asked, amazed by the number of books scattered across the table. He was leaning against the counter, still petting an overly eager Bosco. Yes, Sandra replied, squinting at the table. She found her glasses behind a copy of Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds and slipped them on. Follow me. Sandra led C.W. through the kitchen, down a long hall, and into the middle of a large living room. These are my books. C.W. looked around and up. He was surrounded by rows upon rows of books. Books on all four walls, books from floor to ceiling, books of all shape and sizes, black and white books, books of different colors, some neatly piled in rows, some askew on the shelves as if someone had been browsing through them and hadn't had time to put them back in order. There was a ladder at least 12 feet high that could be placed at any location so a book on the highest shelf could be snagged, read, and then replaced. Where'd you get so many books? C.W. said in awe as he turned slowly in a circle, his eyes wide, moving up and down the rows. I've been collecting them since I was a little girl. Always loved books. I try to buy 2 to 3 new ones each week. Books are my path to knowledge, learning, new ideas. They take me to new places, although I've been almost everywhere in the world. They take me back in time, forward into the future. They open up dimensions I've never even dreamed of. She stopped and then laughed. Sorry, I get carried away. Come on. Sandra led C.W. back into the kitchen. Speaking of reading, what's the last book you read? She snatched a package of Danish pastry from the top of the refrigerator, placed it on the cupboard, then poured a glass of milk and handed it to C.W. He took a bear claw out of the package and started wolfing it down. He couldn't think of the last book he'd read, except for some picture books when he was in kindergarten. He pretended to concentrate hard as he stared at Bosco. Well, I just finished Old Spot. Sandra studied him for a moment. Old Spot, uh-huh. And who wrote that? C.W. was caught in a lie. In heavy pain, he thought a moment, scowled, and then said, I think it was that guy, Darwin? Uh-huh, Sandra said again, a smile beginning at the edge of her mouth. Isn't he the same guy who wrote Hamlet? Yeah, that's him, C.W. said, and took a swallow of milk, then quickly changed the subject. How come you play upside down like that? It's good for the circulation. Can you stand on your head? C.W. shrugged. You kidding? Do it all the time. Show me. C.W. put the bear claw down, went over to the corner, and tried to stand on his head. He couldn't get his legs up. After several attempts, Sandra threw a rubber donut to him. Here, try this. C.W. placed the object on the floor, but still couldn't turn himself upside down. Well, can you mow grass? You kidding? Do it all the time. Good. Finish your breakfast. I'll be right back. She started out and turned back. Darwin, huh? She howled with laughter as she went out the back door, followed by the animals. Left alone in the kitchen, C.W. gobbled another sweet roll as he checked out the photographs on the wall. There was a photo of Sandra as a young woman, dressed as an aerialist with other members of her family. The caption read, The Flying Galanos. Another photograph showed a man standing upside down on one finger on top of a high pole. The caption underneath said, The Great Bando. There were many other pictures. 2 of the most notable showed Sandra, one with her back arched over a pole carried by 2 men high in the air, playing her trumpet upside down, and the other as a child holding a trumpet and standing beside a man named Harry James.